last we left off, our intrepid hero, the reporter, or maybe it was the reporter that had a troubled past. Yeah, it was the one that had a troubled past because he wanted him to report on crime stuff. Had found his way into the mansion to see what the heck is going on, and found, of all things, dun dun, a dead body. The doctor that had so cheerily welcomed our original two heroes into the mansion was carrying a dead body. Now let's see what the deal is with this corpse. Let us begin. A corpse it was. The attitude proved that. With a numb relief, O'Hara realized it was not the body of Skip Handlon. This had been a much larger man than Skip, and the clothing was different from anything Handlon had worn. The light was now disappearing down the stairway. For a moment, O'Hara felt undecided as to his next move. Should he follow Kel and his burden, or should he not take advantage of the fine opportunity to continue his search of the upper story? That scream still rang in his ears. There had been a very evident feminine quality in it, and the remembrance of that fact reproached him. Had he been guilty of mincing daintily about in this old house, while a woman was being done to death under his nose, when a little bolder action on his part might have saved her? Stepping once more into the hall, he advanced to the door, just closed behind the professor, and tried it, only to find it locked. Out of a pocket came several articles best known to the profession: a piece of stiff wire, a skeleton key, and other paraphernalia calculated to reduce the obstinate mechanism to submission. For a minute, 2, 3, he worked at the ancient lock, and then without a creak the door swung open. A touch of oil to the hinges had ensured their silence. Jimmy O'Hara believed in being artistic in his work, especially when it came to the fine points, and he was. He found himself in the same room where the drugged cigars had been proved the undoing of Handlon and Perry. In order to not alarm the professor unduly by chance noises and perhaps invite a surprise attack upon himself, O'Hara closed the laboratory door behind him and let the lock spring again. Hastily he made a search of the place. No trace of the missing reporter could he find, except 2 half-consumed cigars in a corner whence the professor had impatiently kicked them. On a big table in the center of the room, however, was an object which excited his interest. It was apparently nothing more or less than a giant Crookes tube, connected in some way with a complicated mechanism contained in a wooden cabinet under the table. Question of the day: what is a Crookes tube? Let's find out. Crookes tube. It's a chemistry thing. A Crookes tube is an early experimental electrical discharge tube with partial vacuum, invented by English physicist William Crookes and others around 1869 to 1875, in which cathode rays, streams of electrons, were discovered. They look like this. Just a moment, let me see my camera here so I can see what's going on. Yes, they look like this. They're basically very primitive cathode ray tubes. Duly noted. Alright, let me rearrange my windows again. There we go. Probably this apparatus was concerned in the professor's strange experiments which had so aroused the countryside. He studied it curiously, his eyes for the moment closed in thought, until a slight sound somewhere near at hand caused him to open them again. Was the cow returning? Quickly he extinguished the lamp and glided to a nearby door, thinking to secrete himself here and take Kel by surprise. To his consternation, the door swung inward at a touch. He prepared instinctively for a battle against any foe who might present himself, and for a moment he held himself taut. And then, when nothing of an alarming nature had happened, for a moment he held himself taut, and then nothing of an alarming nature having happened, he drew a swift breath of relief and flashed on his light. He gave vent to a low exclamation. The swiftly darting shaft from the torch had revealed the figure of a girl, bound and gagged. The girl lay trembling on a wretched bed in the corner of a dilapidated old chamber. O'Hara crossed the room and bent over her. Still wary of a trap, He glanced back in the direction of the laboratory door. All safe there. Jimmy made haste to remove the cruel gag from her mouth. Courage. Half a minute and you'll be free. He produced a knife with a suspiciously long blade and cut her bonds. He then assisted her to her feet, where she reeled dizzily. Realizing the need for fast action, he made her sit down while he massaged the bruised arms and ankles, which were badly swollen from the tight ropes. The girl had apparently been in the grip of such terrible fright she had temporarily lost her power of speech. Mentally, he chalked up another score against the professor, as the girl made several ineffectual attempts to speak. Easy, kid. Just sit tight, and when you feel able, you can tell me all about it. I'm gonna get him good for this, you can bank on that. She thanked him with a faint smile, and all of a sudden, she found her voice. Who are you? Where is father? Oh, tell me, please. I'm afraid that horrible man has murdered him. Well... Are you a servant here? I don't know who to trust. My name is Jimmy O'Hara, and I hope you don't worry about me. I'm gunning for the professor myself. Tell me as quickly as you can what you know about him. He kept an eye on the door of the adjoining laboratory. Any moment he expected to hear the sound of the old man's approach. The room would make an ideal place to ambush the maniac, he'd swiftly decided. I'm Norma Mannion. Please don't delay, but see if you can locate my father. The girl's voice was agonized. I heard him groan half an hour ago, and a little later came a terrific crash. Oh, I'm afraid he's dead. Reluctantly, Jimmy gave up the idea of ambushing the professor. Wait here. If you hear a shot, join me as soon as you can. I want to take him alive if I can, but... With this parting hint, he disappeared through the door into the laboratory. Down the carpeted hall, he crept to the stairway, and here he stopped and listened, but to his sensitive ears came no sound from below. Must gone down to the cellar with the body. Here goes for a general exploration. With more boldness than the occasion perhaps really justified, he descended the stairs and proceeded to examine the ground floor rooms minutely. The first was the room through which he had made entrance to the house. It proved to be but a storeroom containing nothing of interest, and he soon decided to waste no more time on it. The adjoining chamber, however, yielded some surprising finds. He had pushed back a dusty portiere to find himself in what could be nothing less than the professor's sleeping chamber. At present the bed was unoccupied, though it showed signs of recent use. The electric torch played swiftly over every possible corner which could constitute a hiding place for an assassin, and it revealed nothing. Now the ever-searching ray fell upon an old-fashioned dresser, on which was piled a miscellaneous array of articles. Oh, sorry. Where were we? A miscellaneous array of articles, yes. Here were combs, brushes, a wig, a huge magnifying glass, and a gold watch. With a barely suppressed exclamation, Jimmy pounced upon the gold timepiece. It was Handlon's. So well did he know the particular design of his watch that he could have recognized it in the dark by sense of touch alone. So the man was not averse to robbery among his other activities. The former two-story man thought fast. Handlon had probably been done in, and the body had been disposed of in some strange manner. The only thing that remained to be done, since the unlucky photographer was evidently past human help, was to cut short the professor's list of murders. With the intention of missing no essential detail, O'Hara swept the ray of the searchlight around the chamber once more, but discovered no more of importance. Deciding that the sleeping chamber could yield no further clue, he shut off the telltale ray and stepped noiselessly back into the next room. Here he groped his way around until he encountered a door which stood open. A moment's cautious exploration with an outstretched foot revealed the top step of a descending staircase. No faintest glimmer of light was visible, but muffled sounds proceeding from the depths told him that someone was below. With infinite care, feeling his way gingerly over the rickety old steps, and fearful that an unexpected creak from one of the ancient boards would at any moment prove his undoing, he commenced the descent. Once aboard, did groan softly, causing him to stop in his tracks and stand with bated breath. He listened for sign of movement below, while his heart loudly told off a dozen strokes. Stealthily he continued his progress until finally soft earth under his feet told him he had reached the cellar bottom. Now his straining eyes perceived a tiny bit of light and simultaneously became conscious of a deathly stench. The damp earth patting his footsteps, he advanced swiftly toward the source of light, which now seemed to lie in stripes across his line of vision. He soon saw that the stairs gave upon a small boarded-off section of the cellar proper, and light was seeping between the boards. And here was a rickety door, fortuitously equipped with a large knothole. O'Hara applied an eye to this, and what he saw nearly ruined even his cast-iron nerve. The professor was working beside a heavy wooden cask from which issued the horrible stench. From time to time a sodden thud told that he was hacking something to pieces with an axe. Now and then he would strain mightily at a dark and bulky thing which lay on the floor, a thing that required considerable strength to lift. It seemed to be getting lighter after each spasm of frenzied chopping. For a second, Kel's shadow wavered away from the thing, and the enervated newspaper man saw it plainly. His senses almost left him, as he realized that he was witnessing the dismemberment of a human body. As he hacked the fragments of tissue from the torso, the fiend carefully deposited each in the huge cask. At such times a faint boiling sound was heard, and there arose an effluvium that bade fair to overcome even the monster engaged in the foul work. Effluvium, what's that mean? Question of the day. Effluvium, an unpleasant or harmful odor, secretion, or discharge. Coming from the Latin effluvere. Effluvere. To flow out. Neat. So it's the big plume of smoke, basically. That's a good word. That's a good Scrabble word. Effluvium, because it's got like a V in there. That's a good one. And I feel like that's one you would totally get called on. You'd play it and they'd be like, "No way, man, that's not a word." And then they'd be like, "Oh, you lose your turn." You know? Anyway, I digress. At last, the limbs and the head had been entirely removed. The professor evidently decided that the trunk should be left whole, and he put his entire strength into the job of getting it into the cask. It was almost more than he could negotiate, but finally a dull splash told that he had succeeded. At this moment, Jimmy O'Hara came out of his trance. The horrible proceedings had left him faint and shaken, and he wished heartily that he could leave the disgusting place as fast as his legs could carry him. But there was still work to be done, and he resolved to get it over with. The lantern. First he must put that out of commission. The maniac would then be at his mercy. Slowly, steadily, he stole through the doorway, his eyes glued to the professor's back. Soon enough he was within a yard of the lantern, and he drew back his foot for the kick. The next moment Jimmy found himself gazing into the glaring eyes of the intended victim. Instinctively he struck out with the clubbed automatic, but the blow must have fallen short, or else the professor had developed an uncanny agility. Now to his horror he saw the flashing blade of the blood-stained axe raised on high. He had no time to dodge the blow. He pressed the trigger of the Colt from the position in which he held it. The bullet grazed the upraised arm, and the axe fell toward O'Hara from fingers lacking strength to retain it, and he grasped it by the handle in midair. The next moment the assassin collected his wits and sprang at him. Silently, the breath of both coming in gasps, the two men strove, each clawing desperately at the other's throat. The reporter fought with the knowledge that should he lose, he would never again see the light of day, the other with the fear of the justice that would deal with him. The maniac hugged his arms tightly about Jimmy, pinioning him so tightly the reporter could not use his gun. At length their convulsive movements brought the men close to the lantern, and the next second the cellar was plunged in darkness. A moment later the professor tripped over some hidden obstruction and fell, dragging his opponent with him to the earthen floor. To Jimmy's surprise, there was no further movement from the body beneath him. Could the old villain be playing possum? He cautiously shifted his hold and grasped the hidden throat. He pressed the professor's windpipe for a moment, but there was no answering struggle. Slowly the truth dawned upon him. The man fell heavy to the floor. The heavy fall to the floor had rendered the older man insensible. He must work fast. Reaching into his pocket, he brought out the ever-handy electric torch and flashed it over the features of his prisoner. Cal was breathing heavily. With dexterous hands, O'Hara swiftly went through the old man's pockets, removing all which might tend to make that worthy dangerous. An ugly-looking pistol of large caliber, a blackjack similar to his own, and a small bottle. The latter item Jimmy examined curiously, finally uncorking it and inhaling the contents. He inhaled, not wisely, but too well. The fumes from the vial were nigh overpowering, and he reeled back, nauseated. He hastily replaced the cork. Just what the nature of the powerful stuff was, he never really attempted to discover. One acquaintance was enough. He staggered to his feet and got the lantern lighted, and then sat, gun in hand, waiting for his prisoner's return to his senses. This was becoming increasingly imminent, judging by certain changes in the professor's respiration. Finally, there came a series of shuddering movements as the man attempted to raise his battered body. "Get up, you butcher, and march upstairs. And just remember, I've got you covered. Don't make any false moves." He prodded the prostrate form of the now glaring fiend before him. The stench of the place was nearly overcoming him. And again he felt an overwhelming desire to dash madly from that den of evil and once more breathe God's fresh air. Under the stimulus of several shoves, the professor finally won to his feet and stumbled up the stairs. Jimmy was taking no chances and kept the automatic sharply digging into the ribs of his prisoner. The fight, however, seemed to temporarily have been taken out of the old man, and he made no resistance as the reporter drove him up onto the laboratory. Yeah. Anyway, just a moment. I'm going to change the category on Twitch because I don't feel like IRL is the right category for this. We'll just hang on one moment while I do this. Sorry about that. We left off. Returning to the story, the room he found exactly as he left it. At a word from him, Norma Mannion came from her hiding place in the horrible room where she'd been kept prisoner. With a hysterical scream, she fell limply to the floor. The sight of her father's murderer had proved too much for her. And forgetting his prisoner for the moment, Jimmy sprang to the girl's side. Kel chose this moment to make a dash for freedom, but his footsteps were not as noiseless as he intended, and O'Hara whirled just in time to see his quarry about to throw open the hall door. Jimmy dove for his gun, only to encounter the professor's mysterious vial, which, though forgotten, still lay in his pocket. With no time to think, he acted purely upon instinct. His arm drew back, and the bottle flew straight for the professor's head. Dun dun. By a miracle, the missile missed its mark. Came a shivering crash as the bottle struck a stud in the massive door. Of a sudden, recalling the terrific potency of the contents of that particular bottle, Jimmy gasped in dismay. Norma Mannion's safety drove every other thought from his mind. At any cost, he must remove her from the proximity of these lethal fumes. Hastily, and without a backward glance, he gathered the girl into his arms and dashed into the room where he had first found her. Ascertaining she had but swooned, he placed her gently on the bed, and in some perplexity as to his next move, he stared at the beautiful face, now so wan and white. It was strange that he hadn't noticed the fact before. She was beautiful. He even took a second look, then, noting a continued absence of all sound from the laboratory, decided to investigate. Gingerly, he pushed open the door, sniffing the air cautiously as he advanced. To his nostrils gradually came a slight scent, which, though almost imperceptible, made his senses reel. As he approached the hall door, he found the atmosphere heavy with the soporific vapors from the broken vial, and he staggered drunkenly. He gave a start of surprise. and on the floor, lying in a grotesque huddle which suggested a most unpleasant possibility, was the inert body of Professor Kell. Jimmy bent over the body and put an experienced ear to the heart. Yes, there was a faint beat, very faint. Even as he listened, he perceived a slight increase in the respiration. Now the breath began coming in great choking gasps, only to die suddenly to next to nothing. At last, with a rueful sigh, Jimmy reached to his hip and produced the Private O'Hara flagon. He stooped over the professor's form once more, and by dint of much prying at clenched jaws, managed to force a sizable charge of fiery liquid down the old man's throat. Jimmy had just begun to entertain a strong hope that this latter effort would bring the professor to life, when his keen ear detected signs of a commotion below. He sprang from his position over the slowly reviving Kell and leaped to a vantage point beside the door. A blackjack miraculously appeared from some hidden part of his anatomy, and the ever-dependable Colt also became in evidence. Now came the banging of a door, muffled voices, a crash as of a chair overturned in the dark. Up rolled a horrible oath, and the same was rendered in a voice to Jimmy sweetly familiar. Came the sound of footsteps on the stairway, and several persons coming along in the hall.
Where the hell is Jimmy? If we met with any monkey business in this hellhole, I'll see the damn place burn to the ground before I leave it.
Delightedly, Jimmy jerked open the door. "I'm still alive, Chief," he chirped as the old man strode into the laboratory. Bland was followed by Perry, who seemed to be in a sort of daze. Bringing up the rear were a pair of plainclothesmen who Jimmy knew very well, almost too well. One of these gentlemen bore a lantern which reminded Jimmy strongly of some that he'd seen that night guarding an open ditch in the public highway. The professor had fully regained consciousness and was struggling to his feet, and as for Norma Mannion, she'd suddenly appeared, leaning weakly against the door casing, and was surveying the group in great alarm. After being assured by O'Hara that they were her friends, she smiled wanly. To Bland and the others she was, of course, an unexpected factor in the weird night's doings, and for several moments they regarded her curiously. At length, Jimmy, sensing the question in the old man's eyes, elected to offer a few words of explanation.
Miss Mannion has just been through a terrible experience. She and her father have been for some time at the mercy of this monster,
he indicated Cal,
and her nerves are completely shattered. We'd better get her out of this as quickly as we can. Mike. Don't stand there with your teeth and your gums like that. Take this girl out to my car and let her lie down. She needs a stimulant, too. If you search my car and find it enough bread liquor in the left back door pocket, I don't know a thing about it. And to stay with her so she won't be afraid to go to sleep.
She smiled in silent gratitude and allowed the plainclothesman to lead her away from the chamber of horror. The reporter lost no time in telling Bland of his failure to find Skip Handlon. He went on to acquaint the chief with the facts of all that had occurred while he had been at the professor's house, and the fiery old fellow listened grimly. When Jimmy came to the story of the corpse and the cask, the editor breathed one word:
Burn it.
Jimmy nodded sadly. All eyes turned to the dejected huddle on the floor that was Professor Kell. And finally Bland could wait no longer, but fixed a terrible eye on the murderer, and demanded harshly,
"Where's Handlon?"
Now the professor burst into a fit of insane laughter that curdled the blood of the listeners.
"You ask me that? It's almost too good. You sent your two precious reporters out to my house to pry into my secrets and thought to display my name all over your yellow sheet, but you forgot that you were dealing with Professor Anton Kell, didn't you?" The last he fairly shrieked. "A lot of people have tried to intrude upon me before, but none have ever escaped."
"We know that," cut in Jimmy, for he was getting impatient and the old man's boasting seemed out of place.
"You're slated for the rope anyway, after what I discovered down in the cellar."
He jerked his eyes in the direction of the door significantly.
Now we propose to find Handlon, and the better it'll be for you if you tell us where you've done with him. Otherwise, you can... If you're so clever, just find out for yourselves. He isn't so far away that you couldn't touch him by reaching out with your hand. In fact, he's been with you quite a while. Well, if you must know, there he is. With an insane chuckle, he pointed at Horace Perry, and Perry did a strange thing.
Yes, you fiend, here I am.
Whose voice was that? Was it Perry speaking, or was it Skip Handlon? Most assuredly, Perry stood before them, but the voice, in a subtle manner, reminded the group strongly of poor old Skip. As he spoke, Perry launched himself at the professor's throat and had to be restrained by the others. Savagely he fought them, but slowly and surely they overcame his struggles and placed him, writhing, into a chair. Of a sudden, Bland leaned forward and scrutinized Perry's face sharply. Had the reporter gone insane too? The pupils of his eyes had taken on a sort of strange contraction, a fixed quality that was almost ludicrous. He looked like a man under hypnosis. He'd gone limp in their grasp, but now suddenly he stiffened. His eyes underwent another startling change, this time glowing undoubtedly with the look of reason. Bland was mystified and waited for Perry to explain his strange conduct, and the latter seemed finally to come to. Simultaneously, he realized that his peculiar lapse from consciousness had been observed by the others. "Guess I may as well admit it," he said with a wry smile. "Ever since I came back from my assignment with Kel, I've had, a hell of a time. Half the time I've been a daze and not have had the least idea of what I was doing. Funny part of it is that I've seemed to keep right on doing things even while I was out of my head." He told briefly the visions he'd had, and which had seemed to contend with his brother reporter, the horrid sensations as he felt himself overcome, the black oblivion in which he then found himself, and the mysterious manner in which he'd left Keegan on that ill-fated assignment. "What have you done to Handlon?" Jimmy's voice cut in. He was standing over the form of the maniac, rigid and menacing. "You have exactly 2 minutes to tell me."
"Find out for yourself."
"I will," was the answer. And on an instant, the horrible shriek rent the air. Jimmy had quickly grasped both the professor's arms at the wrists and was slowly twisting them in a grip of iron. Kel's face went white, the lips writhed back over toothless gums, the eyes closed in the supreme effort to withstand the excruciating pain, and then, "Enough, enough!" O'Hara eased the pressure slightly, but retained his hold upon the claw-like hands. "Talk fast." The old man struggled futilely in the grasp of the powerful reporter, finally glancing in the direction of the others. Would they show signs of pity? Surely not hard-boiled Bland. The chief was watching the struggles of the victim through a cloud of tobacco smoke which he was slowly exhaling through his nose. The plainclothesman displayed no sign of interest at all, and so the game was up. "Very well. Handlon and Perry are both occupying the same body."
What? Jimmy, I guess you'll have to put the screws to him some more. He's trying to make fools of us at the last minute.
No. What I say is true. I've been working for years on my system of deastralization. This last year I at length perfected my electric deastralizer, which amplifies and exerts the fifth influence of decohesion.
The whole party began to look uneasy and gazed apprehensively at the huge Crookes tube, which still stood in its supporting frame on the table.
"I've been forced to experiment on animals for the most part. I succeeded in deastralizing a dog and a bull and caused them to exchange bodies. The bodies continued to function. I was enthusiastic. Other experiments took place, of which I will not tell you. Finally, I began to long for a human subject on which to try my fifth influence."
Just get down to cases if you don't mind, Cal. Suppose you tell us just what you did to Handlon, where we can find him. I may as well mention that your life depends upon it. If we find that you've done for him, something worse than death may happen to you.
The tone was menacing, although Handlon was a comparatively late acquisition of the old chief's staff. Still, he'd been loyal to the paper. When your two damned reporters entered my driveway, I saw them coming through a powerful glass which I always have on hand. I had no desire to see them, but they forced themselves upon me. At last I determined they should furnish material for my experiments. If your men had looked into the grove behind the barn, they would have found the automobile, which furnished two more subjects I was keeping on hand in a room upstairs. Old Mannion and his daughter gave me quite a bit of trouble, but I kept them drugged most of the time. He broke out of the room tonight, though, and I had to kill him. It was self-defense. Anyway, I found it was possible to make two astrals exchange bodies, but I also wanted to see if it were possible to cause two astrals to occupy the same body at the same time, and if so, what the result would be. I found out it was rare sport to watch your star reporter leave my house. He was glad to leave, I believe.
Well, I guess we have to believe him whether we want to or not.
How about making him release Hanlon's, what do you call it, astral from Perry's body? Just a moment. The voice now was unmistakably Hanlon's, though it was issuing from the throat of Perry. In the minute I have in consciousness, let me suggest, before you do any de-astralizing, you locate my body. Until then, if I'm released from this one, I'm kinda dead. The words struck the group dumb. Where was Hanlon's body? Could the professor produce it? That worthy looked rather haunted at the moment, and they began to see the fear of death coming upon him. Mercy, mercy, he begged as the four men started to advance upon him. As soon as I de-astralized Hanlon, I destroyed his body in my pickling barrel down cellar. But there is another way. Well, go out and get the Hanlon girl. She can be de-astralized, and this Hanlon can have her body. At this suggestion, advanced so naively, the four men recoiled in horror. It was even entirely too much for the hard-boiled Bland, and he could hardly restrain himself from applying the editorial fist to the leering face before him. Undoubtedly, Professor Kell was hopelessly insane, and for that reason he held himself in leash. Kell, you're slated to pull off one more stunt. You know what it is. Get busy. And just remember that I'm standing over here. He indicated a corner, well separated from the rest, with his cannon aimed in your direction. If things aren't just according to Hoyle, you get plugged, you get me?
What about it, man? Is it going to be treating Hanlon right to de-astralize him now? It'll be his last chance to have a body on this earth.
Unfortunately... Hang on, that's O'Hara. Unfortunately, that body never belonged to Hanlon. Hence, I fail to see why Perry should be discommoded for the balance of his life with a companion astral. Perry is clearly entitled to his own body, free and unhampered. Friend Skip is out of luck, well... Unless, I don't mind telling you, Cal, you just gave me an idea. Snap to it now. The professor dragged himself to his feet, and under the menace of the automatic, fumbled under the table until he had located the intricate apparatus before mentioned. Now, if... he's not a girl. He doesn't have a feminine voice. Now, if Mr. Perry or Hanlon will kindly recline at full length at his table, the experiment will begin. Just remember,
Cal, this is no experiment,
advised Bland, fixing the professor with an ugly eye.
You do as you're told.
The other made no reply, but threw a hidden switch. Perry, lying flat on his back on the ancient table, suddenly found himself being bathed by what seemed to be a ray of light, and yet it wasn't a ray of light. What was it? It surely wasn't visible, yet it was tangible. A terrific force was emanating from that devilish globe above him, drawing him out of himself, or... no. Was he expanding? Again his ears became filled with confused, horrible, terrible sounds. The outlines of the room faded from sight, and he felt a strange sense of inflation, of lightness, oblivion. From where the others sat, a gasp of wonder went up. At first contact of the switch, there had been a momentary flash of greenish light within the bulb, and then a swift transition to a beautiful orange. It then faded altogether, leaving the glass apparently inert and inactive. But alas, this was not the case. The form lying beneath the bulb was evidently being racked with untold tortures. The face became a thing of horror. Now it had twisted into grotesque semblance of Handlon's, now it again resembled Perry's. The professor quietly increased the pressure of the current. From the bulb emanated a steel-gray exhalation of what must be termed light, and yet it was so real, it was so seemingly material. Assuredly, it was not a ray of light as we understand it. It came in great beating throbs in which the actual vibrations were entirely visible. Under each impact, the body of Perry seemed to change, slowly at first and then with increasing speed. The body was now swelled to enormous size. Bland reached forward to touch it.
This decohering interference causes the atoms that go to make a living body repel one another. When the body is sufficiently nebulized, the soul... Back, you fool!
He suddenly shrieked, grasping Bland by the arm.
Do you want to kill him?
Bland hurriedly retreated, convinced perforce that Kell's alarm was genuine. The editorial fingers had penetrated the subject's garments without resistance, and sank into the body as easily as if it were so much as soft soap. Ooh. The body continued to expand until at length even the hard-headed plainclothesman realized that it had been reduced to a mere vapor. Within this horrid vaporized body, which nearly filled the room and which had now lost all semblance to a man, could be discerned two faint shapes. Swiftly the professor extinguished the lantern. The shapes, vague though they were, could be recognized as those of Horace Perry and Skip Handlon, and they were at strife. All eyes were now focused on Professor Kell, who was evidently waiting for something to happen. The two apparitions within the body cloud were at death grips. One had been overcome and was temporarily helpless. It was that of Handlon, and then again the astral of Perry forcibly ousted that of Handlon from the cloud cyst. And at that instant Professor Kell shut off the influence tube. At once a terrific metamorphosis took place. There came a sharp sound, almost like a clap of thunder, with the slight exception that this was occasioned by exactly the reversed effect. Instead of being an explosion, it might be more properly termed an implosion, for the mist cloud suddenly vanished. The decohering influence had been removed, and the cloud had condensed into the form of Perry. Apparently none the worse, he was even now beginning to recover consciousness. The astral of Handlon was no longer visible, however, though it was hovering in the vicinity. Perry's body was once again his own. At this time, Jimmy O'Hara elected to start something new by hitting the professor a workmanlike blow on the back of the head with the butt of his automatic. The next thing Bland or anyone else present knew, the unconscious body of the professor was on the table, and Jimmy was groping for the concealed switch. At length he found it, and the green flash of light appeared in the bulb, followed by the brilliant orange manifestation.
What are you doing?
Gasped Bland.
De-astralizing the professor. Don't you get the idea yet? Watch.
Fascinated, the four men saw the terrific emanation take its baleful effect. As before, the body commenced to expand, and gradually took on a misty outline. Larger and larger it grew, until finally it had become a vast cloud of intangible nothingness, which filled the room like some evil nebula. A cry of consternation from the detective aroused Jimmy. Skip Handlon's astral had appeared within the field of the nebula to fight for possession. There ensued what was perhaps the strangest encounter ever witnessed. Though he was in poor physical shape, the professor seemed to have an extremely powerful astral, and for some time the spectators despaired of Handlon's victory. Once the latter, evidently realizing that the powerful influence tube had rendered him visible, glanced sharply in Jimmy's direction. O'Hara was considerably puzzled at this, but watched the progress of the struggle tensely. At length the moment seemed to arrive which the reporter's astral had been awaiting. It turned tail and fled away from the astral of the professor, disappearing beyond the outer confines of the nebula. Jimmy suddenly divined the other's purpose, and dove for the hidden switch. As he had anticipated, Handlon had finally given up the attempt to overcome the astral of Kell by force, and had made up his mind to accomplish his end by strategy. Almost on the instant that Jimmy's hand closed on the switch, the reporter's astral again leaped into the field of the nebula. Fiercely it signaled to the former second-story man to shut off the current, but the admonition was unnecessary, for Jimmy had already done so. Swiftly the cloud cyst faded. Even as the group caught a fleeting sight of Skip Hanlon, the last that mortal eyes would ever see of him as he actually was, there came a violent disturbance at the edge of the shrinking nebula. With the speed of condensation of the atoms, which comprised the body of Professor Kell, served to shut out the pursuing astral of Kell. Even Bland held his breath. The cloud lost its luminous quality, the action of condensation increasing in speed. It was barely visible in the enshrouding gloom. An astral had long since been enveloped within the rapidly accumulating substance. Came a sudden clap of sound as before, and the final act of resolution had been accomplished. Whether the professor had succeeded in regaining a position within the cloud cyst before the crucial second, none could say. Jimmy relighted the lantern, and apparently the effect of the love tap administered by the automatic was more or less of a lasting character, and the men were put to some ado to restore the body of Kell to consciousness. At length their efforts began to bear fruit, however, and it became expedient to remove the patient to the softer couch in the sitting room below. As they moved forward to lay hold of a limp body, a figure appeared in the doorway to the hall. It was the plainclothesman, Riley. How's about getting underway for town, he wanted to know. Is the old party croaked yet? Miss Mannion's had a fierce time, says she won't stay near this house another minute. I don't like this place myself, either. You know, I just got kicked by a poll parrot. Let's get away from here.
Oh, hold on, Riley. What are you talking about? Kicked by a poll parrot?
That's all right, Chief, broke in the now thoroughly cheerful Perry. That donkey I shot probably could have told us all about it. I know positively the bees could talk.
Well, if a donkey could talk and a bull could bite and a hound could hook, why shouldn't a parrot? Dear heavens, I'm getting as crazy as the rest of them. Hurry up and get Cal downstairs so we can see who he is. There I go again. Oh, well, go lie down, Riley.
But look, Bland, look! Riley was pointing a demoralized finger at a cage in the corner. He tugged frantically at Bland's coat sleeve. See what's in there, won't you? I did find your liquor in your car, and Miss Mannion made me take some. I didn't know it'd do this to me. Look in there, please, Mr. Bland. Bland gave Riley a dark look, but nevertheless, he reached for O'Hara's flashlight. In the cage, 2 yellow eyes blinked sleepily out at him, and Perry began to laugh. Why, there's nothing in there but a cat. Skip and I heard it purring when we first came in here this afternoon. Guess Riley...
What heavens, give me a gun.
Hard-boiled Bland, for the moment, failed to merit his sobriquet. The torch in his hand threw a trembling beam into the cage.
It's a snake. There, it's doing it again.
A snake it was, indubitably, a huge black specimen with bright yellow stripes. Bland's frenzied yell seemed to have not excited it at all, for now the sleek fellow had arched its body neatly and was calmly licking its sides with a long forked tongue. After a moment it halted the operation long enough to rub its jaw against a bar of its cage and gave vent to a sociable mew. Even this couldn't dash the spirits of Horace Perry, and he laughed delightedly again as he laid Bland by the arm. That creature's perfectly harmless, Chief. Somewhere, I suppose, there's a mighty dangerous cat at large, but there's no sense in taking it out on this poor reptile. Let's live and let live. With a show of reluctance, Bland returned Jimmy's automatic, and then strode over to where lay the form of Kell. Perry and O'Hara lingered by the cage long enough to arrange a plan, to let the snake outdoors as soon as the opportunity offered, after which they joined their chief. Riley went out to resume his vigil in Bland's car, while his fellow sleuth prepared to light the way downstairs. Under his guidance, the sick man was carried down below without mishap. Downstairs, the now conscious form of the venerable professor was laid out on the ancient sofa until his senses could clear a bit. Presently, the eyelids fluttered open and a feeble voice asked,
Where in the heavens am I, and how did you all get up here?
A joyous gasp went up. That voice, although uttered in somewhat the same vocal quality as Kell's, the intonation and accents had strangely altered. O'Hara leaned eagerly over the figure on the couch, and the question he asked was startling in its incongruity.
How you feeling, Skip?
Rotten. What hit me such a crack on the door? I feel as if I've been dragged through a knothole. Let me up.
You stay still. You aren't fit to move yet. You're going on a long ride and you'll need your strength. Don't talk either.
A half hour later, they left the house. In the front yard, the editor called a hasty conclave, which included the entire party. Hard-boiled Bland has never been known to talk so much at a stretch before or since.
Before we start back, we'd better come to an understanding. In the first place, Skip, come over here, man.
Norma Mannion uttered an involuntary cry of fear as the aged form of Cal passed by her. Skip's instant response to his name had, of course, been perfectly natural to him, but it had an odd effect on the others.
Miss Mannion and gentlemen,
Bland went on with a bow of mock ceremony.
I want you to meet Mr. Call him Saunders. This is Mr. Kenneth Saunders, ladies and gentlemen. When he gets a shave and has his new face patched up, I believe you'll like his appearance much more than you do now. Seriously, folks, I hope with a little fixing up, this gentleman will hardly resemble Professor Andrew Kell. Kell is dead. However, obviously, this gentleman can hardly continue his existence as Skip Handlon. Hence Mr. Saunders. And don't forget the name. Now another little matter. This house has proven a curse to humanity. What has transpired here need never be known. Would it not be wiser to eliminate all traces of tonight's happenings? There is a way.
He looked significantly at the others. You mean?
That we destroy all traces of Professor Kell's villainy. Although he is no more, someone still might notice that his body actively remains, and no one wants to do any explaining.
It's the only way we can protect Handlon,
one of the sleuths ruminated, half to himself.
No judge would ever believe a word about this deastralization business. The chances are we'd all go to the booby hatch, and Handlon would go to prison for Kell's crimes. There were 4 of us that witnessed the fact of the soul transfusion, though. Wouldn't that be enough to clear Skip? Besides, wouldn't it be possible for us to lead a jury out here and duplicate the experiment?
Too much undesirable publicity,
growled Bland, who had for once in his life found reason to keep something out of the headlines.
What do you say, people?
I move we move,
from the detective who had the uncomfortable job of attending to Norma Mannion.
Gentlemen, I believe we're understanding each other. Now I'm going to go into the barn to see if everything's all right. While I'm there, something might happen. You understand?
In the snug seat of Jimmy's speedster, Norma Mannion shivered as she followed the direction indicated by her companion's finger. It was that darkest hour which comes just before the dawn. To the westward could be perceived a dull red glow, which even as they watched with fascinated eyes, developed into an intense glare. And gradually the fading stars became eclipsed into greater glory. 3 cars, motors throbbing as if eager to be gone, stood a space apart on the main road. The car behind O'Hara's was the Manium machine, now occupied by Bland and Riley. The remaining one was a touring car and contained the balance of the party. Perry was at the wheel, and beside him sat the Handlon-Cal-Saunders combination.
Thus passes a den of war.
It's the funeral pyre of my father.
She had long since recovered from her initial outburst of grief at her loss, and now watched the progress of the conflagration dry-eyed. At length Jimmy slipped an arm protectingly about the trembling shoulders.
You've seen enough.
As 3 cars raced from the scene of the Holocaust, faint streamers in the east told of the rising orb of day.
Goodbye, Keegan, forever.
Amen.
Well, that was something. That's not what I was expecting to happen. I was not expecting astral projection. But alas, we did indeed get a story about astral projection. Just give me a moment. I'm going to finish up this yerba so I don't have to interrupt the next story nearly as often. Much better. Now, let's have a little bit of water, and then we'll start in on the next story. From the Ocean's Depths by Sewell Peaslee Wright. That sounds like a pseudonym if I've ever heard one. Sewell Peaslee Wright. Sewell. Come on. I don't know. I'll have Google tell me after the stream. Anyway, from somewhere out on the black, heaving Atlantic, the rapid, muffled popping of a speedboat's exhaust drifted clearly through the night. I dropped my book and stretched, leaning back more comfortably in my chair. There was real romance and adventure. Rum runners seeking out their hidden port with their cargo of contraband from Cuba. Heading fearlessly through the darkness, fighting the high seas, still running after the storm of a day or so before, daring 1,000 dangers for the sake of the straw-packed bottles they carried. Sea-bronzed men with hard, flat muscles and fearless eyes. Ready guns slapping their thighs as they... Absorbed in my mental picture of these modern freebooters, the sudden alarm of the telephone startled me like an unexpected shot fired beside my ear. Brushing the cigarette ashes from my smoking jacket, I crossed the room and snatched up the receiver. "Hello?" I snapped ungraciously into the mouthpiece. It was after 11 by the ship's clock on the mantel, and if... "Taylor?" The voice, Warren Mercer's familiar voice, rattled on without waiting for a reply. "Get your car and come down here as fast as possible. Come just as you are and..." "What's the matter?" "What's the matter?" Who managed to interrupt him?
Burglars?"
I had never heard Mercer speak in that high-pitched, excited voice before. His usual speech was slow and thoughtful and almost didactic. "Please, Taylor, don't waste time questioning me. If it weren't urgent, I wouldn't be calling you, you know. Will you come?" "Well, you bet," I said quickly, feeling rather a fool for ragging him when he was in such deadly earnest. The receiver snapped and crackled. Mercer had hung up the instant he had my assurance that I would come. Usually the very soul of courtesy and consideration, that act alone would have convinced me there was an urgent need for my presence at the monstrosity. That was Mercer's own name for the impressive pile that was once his residence and his laboratory. I threw off my smoking jacket and pulled on a woolen golfing sweater, for the wind was brisk and sharpish. In 2 minutes I was backing the car out of the garage, and a moment later I was off the gravel drive and tearing down the concrete with the accelerator all the way down, and the black wind shrieking around the windshield of my little roadster. My own shack was out of the city limits, a little place I keep to live in when the urge to go fishing seizes me, which is generally about twice a year. Mercer picked the place up for me at a song. The monstrosity, however, was some 4 miles further out from town, and off the highway perhaps a half-mile more. I made the 4 miles in just a shade over that many minutes, and clamped on the brakes as I saw the entrance to the little drive that led toward the sea and Mercer's estate. With gravel rattling on my fenders, I turned off the concrete and swept between the 2 massive stuccoed pillars that guarded the drive. Both of them bore corroded bronze plates, the Billows, the name given the monstrosity by the original owner, a newly rich munitions manufacturer. The structure itself loomed up before me in a few seconds, a rambling affair with square-shouldered balconies and a great deal of wrought ironwork, after the most flamboyant Spanish pattern. It was ablaze with light. Apparently every bulb in the place was burning. Just a few yards beyond the surf boomed hollowly. Just a few yards beyond, the surf boomed hollowly on the smooth, shady... Dang, this is some tongue-twistery stuff. Anyway. Just a few yards beyond, the surf boomed hollowly on the smooth, shady shore, littered now, I knew, by the pitiful spoils of the storm. As I clamped on my brakes, a swift shadow passed 2 of the lower windows. Before I could leap from the car, the broad front door, with its rounded top and circular, grilled window, was flung wide, and Mercer came running to meet me. He was wearing a bathrobe hastily flung on over a damp bathing suit, his bare legs terminating in a pair of disreputable slippers.
Fine, Taylor, I suppose you're wondering what it's all about. I don't blame you. Just come in. Just wait till you see her.
Her? You're not in love by any chance, and bringing me down here like this merely to back up your own opinions of those eyes and lips, Mercer? He laughed excitedly.
You'll see. No, I'm not in love, and I want you to help and not admire. There are only Carson and myself here, you know, and the job's too big for two of us.
He hurried across the broad concrete porch and into the house.
Throw the cap anywhere and come on.
Too amazed to comment further, I followed my friend. This was a Warren Mercer I didn't know. Usually his clean-cut, olive-tinted face was a polite mask that seldom showed even the slightest trace of emotion. His eyes, dark and large, smiled easily, and shone with interest, but his almost beautiful mouth, beneath the long, slim mustache, was always closely cropped, seldom smiled with his eyes. But it was his present excited speech that amazed me most. Mercer, during all the years I'd known him, had never been moved before to such tempestuous outbursts of enthusiasm. It was his habit to speak slowly and thoughtfully in his low, musical voice, even in the midst of our hottest arguments, and we had had many of them. His voice had never lost its calm, unhurried gentleness. To my surprise, instead of leading the way to the really comfortable, though rather gaudy living room, Mercer turned to the left towards what had been the billiard room and was now his laboratory. The laboratory, brilliantly illuminated, was littered as usual with apparatus of every description. Along one wall were the retorts, scales, racks, hoods, and elaborate setups, like the articulated glass and rubber bones of some weird prehistoric monster that demonstrated Mercer's taste for this branch of science. On the other side of the room, a corresponding workbench was littered with a tangle of coils, transformers, meters, tools, and instruments, and at the end of the room, behind black high control panels, with gleaming bus bars and staring, gaping meters, a pair of generators hummed softly. The other end of the room was nearly all glass, and opened onto the patio and the swimming pool. Mercer paused a moment with his hand on the knob of the door, a strange light in his dark eyes.
Now you'll see why I called you here. You can judge for yourself whether the trip was worth it. Here she is. With a gesture, he flung open the door, and I stared, following his glance, down to the great tiled swimming pool. It was difficult for me to describe the scene. The patio wasn't large, but it was beautifully done. Flowers and shrubs, even a few small palms, grew in profusion at the enclosure, while above, through the movable glass roof, made in sections to disappear in fine weather, was the empty blackness of the sky. None of the lights provided for the illumination of the covered patio were turned on, but all the windows surrounding the patio were aglow, and I could see the pool quite clearly. The pool and its occupant. We were standing at one side of the pool near the center. Directly opposite us, seated on the bottom of the pool, was a human figure, nude save for a great mass of tawny hair that fell about her like a silken mantle. The strangely graceful figure of a girl, one leg stretched out straight before her, the other drawn up and clasped by the interlocked fingers of her hands. Even in the soft light I could see her perfectly, through the clear water, her pale body outlined sharply against the jade-green tiles. I tore myself away from the staring, curious eyes of the figure. Dear Hylia Mercer, what is it, porcelain? I asked hoarsely. The thing had an indescribably eerie effect, and he laughed wildly. Porcelain? Watch, look! My eyes followed his pointing finger, and the figure was moving. Gracefully it arose to its full height. The great cloud of corn-colored hair floated down about it, falling below the knees. And slowly, with a grace of movement comparable only with the slow soaring of a gull, she came toward me, walking on the bottom of the pool through the clear water as though she floated in the air. Fascinated, I watched her. Her eyes, startlingly large and dark in the strangely white face, were fixed upon mine.
There was nothing sinister in the gaze, yet I felt my body shaking, as though in the grip of a terrible fear. I tried to look away and found myself unable to move. I felt Mercer's tense, sudden grip upon my arm, but I couldn't look at him.
She's smiling,
I heard him exclaim. He laughed. An excited, high-pitched laugh that irritated me in some subtle way. She was smiling and looking up into my eyes. She was very close now, within a few feet of us. She came still closer, until she was at my very feet as I stood on the raised ledge that ran around the edge of the pool, her head thrown back, staring straight up at me through the water. I could see her teeth, blinding white between her coral pink lips, and her bosom rising and falling beneath the veil of pale gold hair. She was breathing, but breathing water. Mercer literally jerked me away from the edge of the pool.
"What do you think of her, Taylor?"
he asked, his dark eyes dancing with excitement.
Tell me about it.
She isn't human?
"I don't know, I think so. As human as you or I. I'll tell you all I know, and then you can judge for yourself. I think we'll know in a few minutes if my plans work out, but first, slip on a bathing suit."
I didn't argue the matter. I let Mercer lead me away without a word. And while I was changing, he told me all he knew of the strange creature in the pool.
"Late this afternoon, I decided to go for a little walk along the beach. I'd been working like the devil since early in the morning, running some tests on what you call my thought telegraph. I felt the need of some fresh sea air. I walked along briskly for perhaps 5 minutes, keeping just out of the reach of the rollers and the spray. You know how it is. The shore was littered with all sorts of flotsam and jetsam, washed up by the big storm. I was just thinking that I would have to have a man with a truck come and clean up the shore in front of the place when, in a little sandy pool I saw her. She was lying face down in the water, motionless, her head towards the sea, one arm stretched out before her, and her long hair wrapped around her like a half-transparent cloak. I ran up and lifted her from the water. Her body was cold and deathly white, although her lips were faintly pink, and her heart was beating, faintly but steadily. Like most people in an emergency, I forgot all I ever knew about first aid. All I could think of was to give her a drink, and of course I didn't have a flask on my person, so I picked her up in my arms and brought her to the house as quickly as I could. She seemed to be reviving, for she was struggling and gasping when I got here with her. I placed her on a bed in the guest room and poured her a stiff drink of scotch, half a tumbler full, I believe. Lifting up her head, I placed the glass to her lips, and she looked up at me, blinking, and took the liquor in a single draught. She didn't seem to drink it, but sucked it out of the glass in a single amazing gulp. That's really the only word for it. The next instant she was off the bed, her face a perfect mask of hate and agony. She came at me, hands clutching and clawing, making the odd murmuring or mewing sounds in her throat. It was then that I noticed for the first time that her hands were, webbed.
Webbed?
Yes, webbed, as are her feet. But listen, Taylor, I was amazed and not a little rattled when she came for me. I ran through the French windows out of the patio. For a moment she ran after me, rather awkwardly and heavily, but swiftly nevertheless. And then she saw the pool. Apparently she forgot I existed. She leapt into the water, and as I approached a moment later, I could see her breathing deeply and gratefully, a smile of relief upon her features as she lay upon the bottom of the pool. Breathing, Taylor, on the bottom of the pool, under 8 feet of water!
And then what, Mercer? I reminded him as he paused, apparently lost in thought.
I tried to find out more about her. I put on my bathing suit and dived into the pool. Well, she came at me like a shark, quick as a flash, her teeth showing, her hands tearing like claws through the water. I turned, but not quickly enough to entirely escape. See?
Mercer threw back the dressing robe, and I saw a ragged tear in the bathing suit on his left side near the waist. Through the rent, 3 deep, jagged scratches were clearly visible.
She managed to claw me just once, though. Then I got out and called on Carson for help. I put him into a bathing suit, and we both endeavored to corner her. Carson got 2 bad scratches and 1 rather serious bite that I bandaged. I have a number of lacerations, but I didn't fare so badly as Carson because, I'm faster in the water than he is. The harder we tried, the more determined I became. She'd just sit there calm and placid until one of us entered the water. Then she became a veritable fury. It was maddening. At last I thought of you. I phoned, and here we are.
But, Mercer, it's a nightmare. We moved out of the room. Nothing human can live underwater and breathe water as she does. Mercer paused a moment and stared at me oddly. The human race came up out of the sea. The human race as we know it. Some may have gone back, you see. He turned and walked away again, and I hurried after him. Mercer, what do you mean, Mercer? Some may have gone back. I don't get it. Mercer shook his head, but made no other reply until we stood again on the edge of the pool. The girl was standing where we had left her, and as she looked up into my face, she smiled again and made a quick gesture with one hand. It seemed to me that she invited me to join her. I believe she likes you, Taylor. You're light skin, light hair. Carson and I are both very dark, almost swarthy, and in that white bathing suit. Yes, I believe she's taken a fancy to you, you see. Mercer's eyes were dancing. If she has, well, it'll make our work very much easier. What work? I asked suspiciously. Mercer, always an indefatigable experimenter, was never above using some of his friends in the benefit of science. And some of his experiments in the past had been rather trying, not to say exciting. I think well, you see, I think I may have what you call my thought telegraph perfected, at least experimentally. I fell asleep working on it at 3 o'clock or thereabouts this morning, and some tests with Carson seemed to indicate it as a success. I should have called you tomorrow for a further test. Nearly 5 years of hard work to a successful conclusion, Taylor, and then this mermaid comes along and makes my experiment appear as about as important as one of those beakers rolling in out there. And what do you plan to do now? I murmured, glancing down at the pale, beautiful face that glimmered up at me through the clear water of the pool. Why, try it on her, of course. Don't you see, Taylor? If it will work on her and we can direct her thoughts, well, we can find out her history, the history for people, for that matter. We'll add a page to scientific history, a whole big chapter, for that matter. It'll make us famous. This is so big it swept me off my feet. Look! And he held out a thin, aristocratic brown hand before my eyes, a hand that shook with nervous excitement. I don't blame you. I'm no savant, and still I can see how amazing this is. Let's get busy. What can I do? Mercer reached around the door into the laboratory and pressed a button. For Carson, we'll need his help. In the meantime, we'll look over the setup. The apparatus is strewn all over the place. He hadn't exaggerated, and the setup was all over the place. The setup consisted of a whole bank of tubes, each one its own shielding copper box. On a much-drilled horizontal panel, propped up on insulators, were half a score of delicate meters of one kind and another, with thin black fingers that pulsed and trembled. Beneath the panel was a tall cylinder wound with a shining copper wire, and beside it another panel upright, fairly bristling with knobs, contact points, potentiometers, rheostats, and switches. Question of the day, what's a rheostat? Rheostat, an electrical instrument used to control the current by varying the resistance. So it's probably just like a lever of some kind. It comes from the Greek rheos, stream, and plus the ending stat. So it quite literally it contains its own meaning. Fittingly, That's something interesting I've found about like words in general, is if you learn a lot of like word chunks from Latin and Greek, you can usually just guess. I'm like, oh, well, I know this word chunk means this thing, and I know this word chunk probably usually means this thing, so it's probably this. It's very useful. Anyway, rheostats. They're levers that vary electrical current. Like, if you guys have seen a lot of what's the show called? The Colony, I think is what it was called, or something along that line. It was a reality TV show where they dropped people into a giant warehouse full of stuff and told them survive for as long as you can. Unfortunately, it got fortunately for the contestants, unfortunately for the writers, it got super easy for them because they dropped an electrical engineer into a building completely chock full of parts. So he engineered like an electrolytic water purifier. Like, basically it ozonates the water so it's not germy and stuff, and they built a colossal charcoal filter, and like they made a wood gasifier and like just a billion other little things, and he made this huge like radio transmitter and like a capacitor and stuff, and just a lot of like neat electrical engineering stuff. They also like found a kid's science kit, and there was an what's it called? It's the basically it transfers electricity from movement, and they rigged a what's it called? They rigged what's the word? A record cartridge out of it, essentially. And then they wired that into a TV so they could listen to a bunch of records that were just sitting around. It basically, like, they should not have let the electrical engineer into the building that was entirely chock full of parts. Like, they made a generator and, like, daisy-chained a bunch of old car batteries together. It just got really much too easy for them, much too quickly. And one of the things they did was they made an electric golf cart that was powered off of the sun, and the way you, like, made it go was a rheometer, because, like, it changed how much power was being sent to the motor. Anyway, I digress a great deal. It's a really cool show. I don't know if they still have it on Netflix. The second season was less cool because they learned their lesson and didn't drop them into a building full of parts. They dropped them into an abandoned neighborhood, and B, they didn't they put a lot more consideration to their cast choices this time so that it didn't get super easy for them. But they also made it much easier for them to make a generator because they actually left like a diesel tractor sitting there, so it was really easy to just, like, as long as you had diesel fuel, you could make electricity. Anyway, I digress. Where were we? We went from rheostats. So there's this huge apparatus of just random electrical stuff, and it's apparently a thought transference thing. On the end of the table, nearest the door, was still another panel, the smallest of the lot, bearing only a series of jacks along one side. In the center, a switch with 4 contact points. A heavy, snaky cable led from this panel to the maze of apparatus further on. This is the control panel. The whole affair, as you understand, is in laboratory form. Nothing assembled, just put the different antennae plug into these jacks like this. He picked up a weird, hastily built contrivance composed of 2 semicircular pieces of spring brass, crossed at right angles. On all 4 ends were bright silvery electrodes, 3 of them circular in shape and 1 of them elongated and slightly curved. With a quick and nervous gesture, Mercer fitted the thing to his head so that the elongated electrode pressed against the back of his neck. Like so. And then the other 3 electrodes. Yeah, exactly. The elongated electrode pressed against the back of his neck, extending a few inches down his spine. Like so. The other 3 circular electrodes rested on his forehead and either side of his head, like so. From the center of the contrivance ran a heavy insulated cord, some 10 feet in length, ending in a simple switchboard plug, which Mercer fitted into the uppermost of the 3 jacks. Probably a jack like this. Oh, I dropped it. 10 out of 10. Flawless victory. Like this. For the people on stream. Sorry for the audio-only folks, but it's a big stereo headphone jack. I promise. It makes sense. Anyway, I digress. I just knocked over that cup, and now there are yerba leaves all over my floor. Everybody's favorite. I'll have to clean those up. Now, you put on this one. He adjusted a second contrivance upon my head, smiling as I shrank from the contact of the cold metal in my skin, and think! He moved the switch from the position marked off to the second contact point, watching me intently, his dark eyes gleaming. Carson entered, and Mercer gestured to him to wait. Very nice old chap, Carson. Impressive even in his bathing suit. Mercer was mighty lucky to have a man like Carson. Something seemed to tick suddenly, somewhere deep in my consciousness. Yes, that's very true. Carson is a most decent sort of chap. The words weren't spoken. I didn't hear them. I just knew them. What? I glanced at Mercer, and he laughed aloud with pleasure and excitement. It worked! I received your thought regarding Carson and then turned the switch so that you received my thought, and well, you did, didn't you? Rather gingerly, I removed the thing from my head and laid it on the table. This is wizardry, Mercer. If it work as well on her. It will, I know it will. If we can get her to wear one of them. I only have 3 of them. I had planned some three-cornered experiments with you, Carson, and myself. We'll leave Carson's out of tonight's experiment, however, for we'll need him to operate the switch. You see, that is to say, it's wired only one permit. It's wired right now, so that only one person transmits thoughts at a time. The other 2 receive. When the switch is on the first contact, number 1 sends, and the numbers 2 and 3 receive. When the switch is on number 2, then he sends thoughts, and numbers 1 and 3 receive them, and so on. I'll lengthen these leads so that we can run them out of the pool, and we'll be ready. Somehow we must induce her to wear one of these things, even if we have to use force. I'm sure the 3 of us can handle her, of course.
Well, we should be able to.
She was such a slim, graceful, almost delicate little thing. The thought that 3 strong men might not be able to control her seemed almost amusing. You haven't seen her in action yet, said Mercer grimly, glancing up from his work of lengthening the cords that led from the antenna to the control panel. And what's more, I hope you don't. On that note, folks, we're we're an hour and 15 minutes into the stream. I'm going to take a short break. For the audio-only folks that are watching this on the stream VOD, it's going to be an incredibly short break, but I'm going to pause the recording now. Well, let us return to the story here in a moment. Let me just pull up Twitch chat so I make sure people aren't screaming about me being either too quiet or too loud. You know, that's always handy. Have ourselves a good old-fashioned drink of water, and then return to the story. I watched him in silence as he spliced and securely taped the last connection. All set. Carson, will you operate the switch for us? I believe everything's functioning properly. He surveyed the panel of instruments hastily, assuring himself that every reading he was finding was correct. Then, with all 3 of the devices he called antenna in his hand, their leads plugged into the control panel, he led the way to the side of the pool. The girl was strolling around the edge of the pool, feeling the smooth tile sides with her hands as we came into view, but as soon as she saw us, she shot through the water to where we were standing. It was the first time I'd seen her move in this fashion. She seemed to propel herself with a sudden mighty thrust of her feet against the bottom. She darted through the water with the speed of an arrow, yet stopped as gently as though she had merely floated there. As she looked up, her eyes unmistakably sought mine, and her smile seemed warm and inviting. She again made that strange little gesture of invitation, and with an effort, I glanced at Mercer. There was something devilishly fascinating about the girl's great, dark, searching eyes. I'm going in. Hand me one of your headset things when I reach for it. Before he could protest, I dove into the pool, and I headed directly toward the heavy bronze ladder that led to the bottom of the pool. I had 2 reasons in mind. I would need something to keep me underwater with my lungs full of air, and I could get out quickly if it were necessary. I had not forgotten the livid, jagged furrows in Mercer's side. Quickly as I shot at the ladder, she was there before me, a dim, wavering white shape, waiting. I paused, holding to a rung of the ladder with one hand. She came closer, walking with the airy grace I'd noted before, and my heart pounded against my ribs as she raised one long, slim arm towards me. The hand dropped gently on my shoulder, pressed it as though in token of friendship. Perhaps, I thought quickly, this was with her a sign of greeting. I lifted my arm and returned the salutation, if salutation it were, aware of a strange rising and falling sound, if salutation it were, aware of a strange rising and falling sound, as if Can I speak English today? Aware of a strange rising and falling sound, as of a distant humming in my ears. The sound ceased suddenly on a rising note, as though of inquiry, and it dawned on me that I'd heard the speech of this strange creature. Before I could think of a course of action, my aching lungs reminded me of the need of air, and I released my hold on the ladder and let my body rise to the surface. As my head broke the water, a hand, cold and strong as steel, closed around my ankle. I looked down. The girl was watching me, and there was no smile on her face right now. "All right!" I shouted across the pool to Mercer, who was watching anxiously. Then, filling my lungs with air again, I pulled myself by means of the ladder to the bottom of the pool, and the restraining hand was removed instantly. The strange creature thrust her face close to mine as my feet touched the bottom, and for the first time I saw her features distinctly. She was beautiful, but in a strange, unearthly sort of way. As I had already noticed, her eyes were sort of an unusual size, and I saw now that they were an intense shade of blue, with a pupil of extraordinary proportion. Her nose was well shaped, but the nostrils were slightly flattened, and the orifices were rather more elongated than I had ever seen before. The mouth was utterly fascinating, and her teeth, revealed by her engaging smile, were as perfect as it would be possible to imagine. The great mane of hair which enveloped her was, as I have said, tawny in hue and almost translucent, like the stems of some seaweeds I've seen. And as she raised one slim hand to brush back some wisps that floated by her face, I saw distinctly, the webs between her fingers. They were barely noticeable, for they were as transparent as the fins of a fish, but they were there, extending nearly to the last joint of each finger. As her face came close to my own, I became aware of the humming, crooning sound I had heard before, louder this time. I could see from the movement of her throat that I had been correct in assuming she was attempting to speak with me. I smiled back at her and shook my head. She seemed to understand, for the sound ceased, and she studied me with a little thoughtful frown, as though trying to figure out some other method of communication. I pointed upward, for I was feeling the need for fresh air again, and slowly mounted the ladder. This time she didn't grasp me, but watched me intently, as though understanding what I did and the reasons for it. "Bring one of your gadgets over here, Mercer. I think I'm making progress." "Good boy," he cried, and came running with two of the antennae, the long insulated cords trailing behind him. Through the water the girl watched him, evident dislike in her eyes. She glanced at me with sudden suspicion as Mercer handed me the two instruments, but made no hostile move. "You won't be able to stay in the water with her," explained Mercer rapidly. The salt water would short out the antenna, you see. Try to get her to wear one, and then get your head out of the water and don yours. And remember, she won't be able to communicate with us by words. We'll have to get her to convey her thoughts by means of mental pictures. I'll try to impress that on her, understand?" I nodded and picked up one of the instruments. "Fire when ready, Gridley," I commented, and sank again to the bottom of the pool. I touched the girl's head with one finger and then pointed to my own head, trying to convey to her that she could get her thoughts to me. Then I held up the antenna and placed it on my own head to show it wouldn't harm her. The next move was to offer her the instrument, moving slowly and smiling reassuringly. No mean feat under water. She hesitated a moment, then her eyes fixed on mine, she slowly fixed the instrument upon her own head, as she'd seen it adjusted upon my own. I smiled and nodded and pressed her shoulder in a token of friendly greeting, then gesturing toward my own head and pointing upward, I climbed the ladder. "All right, Mercer, start at once before she grows restless." "I've already started," he called back, and I hurriedly donned my own instrument. Bearing in mind what Mercer had said, I descended the ladder but a few rungs so that my head remained out of the water, and smiled down at the girl, touching the instrument on my own head and then pointing to hers. I could sense Mercer's thoughts now. He was picturing himself walking along the shore with the stormy ocean in the background. Ahead of him I saw the white body lying face downward in the pool, and I saw him run up to the pool and lift the slim, pale figure in his arms. Let me make it clear at this point that when I say I saw these things, I mean only that the mental images of them penetrated my consciousness. I visualized them just as I could close my eyes and visualize, for example, the fireplace in the living room of my own home. I looked down at the girl. She was frowning and her eyes were very wide. Her head was a little on one side in the attitude of one who listens intently. Slowly and carefully, Mercer thought out the whole story of his experiences with the girl until she had plunged into the pool. Then I saw again the beach with the girl's figure in the pool. The picture grew hazy. I realized Mercer was trying to picture the bottom of the sea. Then he pictured again the girl laying in the pool and once again the sea. I was aware of the soft little tick in the center of my brain that announced that the switch had been moved to another contact point. I glanced down at her, and she was staring up at me with her great, curious eyes, and I sensed, through the medium of the instrument I wore, that she was thinking of me. I saw my own features, idealized, glowing with a strange beauty that was certainly none of my own. I realized that I saw myself, in short, as she saw me. I smiled back at her and shook my head. A strange, dim whirl of pictures swept through my consciousness. I was on the bottom of the ocean. Shadowy shapes swept by silently, and from above a dim bluish light filtered down on a scene such as never mortal eyes have never seen. All around were strange structures of jagged coral, roughly circular as to base, and rounded on top, resembling very much the igloos of the Eskimos. The structures varied greatly in size and seemed to be arranged in some sort of regular order, like houses along a narrow street. Around many of them grew clusters of strange and colorful seaweeds that waved their banners gently, as though some imperceptible current dallied with them in passing. Here and there figures moved, slim white figures that strolled along the narrow street, or at times shot overhead like veritable torpedoes. There were both men and women moving there. The men were broader of shoulder, and their hair, which they wore to their knees, was somewhat darker in color than that of the women. Both were slim, and there was a remarkable uniformity of size and appearance. None of the strange beings wore any garments of any kind, nor were they necessary. The clinging tresses were cinctured at the waist with a sort of cord of twisted orange-colored material, and some of the women wore bands of the same material around their brows. Nearest of all the figures was the girl who was visualizing all of this for us. She was walking slowly away from the cluster of coral structures. Once or twice she paused and seemed to hold conversation with others of the strange people, but each time she moved on. Coral structures grew smaller and poorer. Finally, the girl trod alone on the floor of the ocean, between great growths of kelp and seaweeds with dim, looming passages of faintly tilted coral everywhere. Once she passed close to a tilted, ragged hulk of some ancient vessel, its naked ribs packed with drifted sand. Sauntering dreamily, she moved away from the ancient derelict, and suddenly a dim shadow swept across the sand at her feet, and she arrowed from the spot like a white, slim meteor, but behind her darted a black and swifter shadow, a shark. Like a flash, she turned and faced the monster. Something had drawn from her Something she had drawn from her girdle shone palely in her hand. It was a knife of whetted stone, or perhaps bone. Darting swiftly downward at her feet, spurned the yellow sand, and she shot at her enemy with amazing speed. The long blade swept in an arc, ripped the pale belly of the monster, just as he turned to dart away. A great cloud of blood dyed the water, and the white figure of the girl shot onward through the scarlet flood. Blinded, she didn't see that the jutting rubs of the ancient ship were in her path. I seemed to see her crash head-on into one of the massive timbers, and I cried out involuntarily, glancing down at the girl in the water at my feet. Her eyes were glowing. She knew that I had understood. Hazily then, I seemed to visualize her body floating limply in the water. It was all very vague and indistinct, and I understood that this was not what she had seen, but what she had thought had happened. The impressions grew wilder, swirled, grew gray and indistinct. Then I had a view of Mercer's face, so terribly distorted it was barely recognizable. Then a kaleidoscopic maze of incoherent scenes shot through with flashes of vivid, agonizing colors. The girl was thinking of her suffering, taken out of her native element. In trying to save her, Mercer had almost killed her. That was no doubt why she hated him. My own face was what appeared next, almost godlike in its kindliness and its imagined beauty, and I noticed now that she was thinking of me with my yellow hair grown long, my nostrils elongated like her own, adjusted to what her own ideas of what a man should be. I flung the instrument from my head and dropped to the bottom of the pool, and I gripped both her shoulders gently to express my thanks and friendship. My heart was pounding. There was a strange fascination about this girl from the depths of the sea, a subtle appeal that was answered from some deep subterranean cavern of my being. I forgot the moment who and what I was. I remembered only that a note had been sounded that awoke an echo of a long-forgotten instinct. I think I kissed her. I know her arms were about me, that I pressed her close, that her faces almost met. Her great, weirdly blue eyes seemed to bore into my brain. I could feel them throbbing there. I forgot time and space. I saw only that pale, smiling face and those great dark eyes. Then, strangling, I tore myself from her embrace and shot to the surface. Coughing, I cleared my lungs of the water I had inhaled. I was weak and shaking when I finished, but my head was clear. The grip of the strange fantasy that had gripped me was shaken off. Mercer was bending over me, speaking softly.
I was watching, old man. I can imagine what happened. A momentary psychic fusing of an ancient, long-since broken link. You, together with all mankind, came up out of the sea, but there's no retracing the way.
I nodded, my head bowed on my streaming chest. Sorry, Mercer. Something got into me. Those big eyes of hers seemed to tug at threads of memory buried. I can't describe it. He slapped me on my shoulder, a blow that stung as he had intended it to. It helped jerk me back into the normal.
You've got your feet on the ground again, Taylor. I think there's no danger of you losing your grip on terra firma again. Shall we carry on?
There's more that you'd like to learn? That you think she can give us?
I believe that she can give us the history of her people, if only we can make her understand what we wish. If only we could.
Well, we can try. Mercer hurried back to the other side of the pool, and I adjusted my headset again, smiling down at the girl. If only Mercer could make her understand, and if only she knew what we wanted to learn. I was conscious of the little click that told me the switch had been moved. Mercer was ready to get his message to her. Fixing my eyes on the girl pleadingly, I settled myself by the edge of the pool to await the second and more momentous part of our experiment. The vision was vague, for Mercer was picturing his thoughts with difficulty, but I seemed to see again the floor of the ocean, with a vague light filtering down from above and soft monstrous growths waving their branches lazily in the flood. From the left came a band of men and women, looking around as though in search of some particular spot. I stopped, and one of the older men pointed, the others gathering around him as though in council. Then the band set to work. Coral growth were dragged to the spot. The foundation for one of the semicircular houses was laid. The scene swirled and cleared again, and the house was completed. Several other houses were in the process of building. Slowly and deliberately, the scene moved. The houses were left behind, and before my consciousness now was only a vague and shadowy expanse of ocean floor, and in the sand, dim imprints that marked where the strange people had trod, the vague footprints disappearing in the gloom, in the direction from which the little weary band had come. To me, at least, it was quite clear that Mercer was asking whence they came. Would it be as clear to the girl? The switch clicked, and for a moment I was sure Mercer had not been able to make his question clear to her. The scene was the interior of one of the coral houses. There were persons there, seated on stone or coral chairs, padded with marine growths. One of the occupants of the room was a very old man. His face was wrinkled and his hair was silvery. With him were a man and a woman and a little girl. Somehow I seemed to recognize the child as the girl in the pool. The three of them were watching the old man. While his lips didn't move, I could see his throat muscles twitching as the girl's had done, when she made the murmuring sound I had guessed was her form of speech. The scene faded. For perhaps 30 seconds, I was aware of nothing more than a dim gray mist that seemed to swirl in stately circles. Then gradually it cleared somewhat. I sensed the fact that what I saw now was what the old man was telling, and the majestic swirling mist, was the turning back of time. Here was no ocean bottom, but land, rich tropical jungle. Strange exotic trees and dense growths of rank undergrowth choked the earth. The trees were oddly like undersea growths, which puzzled me for an instant. Then I recalled that the girl could interpret the old man's words only in terms of what she had seen and understood. This was the way she visualized the scene. I'm curious how much of this is left. Let's see. Hi. Can I do the thing? Not that thing. No, not that thing either. Okay, there we go. Now let's see where the next... Oh. That's not too far. That's only 2%. We can finish this. Hang on. Show me my notes and marks from this one, because I just... View notes and marks. Thank you. There we are.
Anyway, back to the story. We can definitely finish this strange tale of the underwater lady. There was a gray haze of mist everywhere. The leaves were glistening with condensed moisture, and swift drops fell incessantly to the soaking ground below. Into the scene roamed a pitiful band of people. Men with massive frames sunken in with starvation, women tottering with weakness. The men carried great clubs, some tipped with rudely shaped stone heads, and both men and women clothed only in short kittles of skin. They searched ceaselessly for something, and I guessed that something was food. Now and then one of the other little band tore up a root and bit at it, and those that did so soon doubled into a twitching knot of suffering, and dropped behind. At last they came to the edge of the sea. A few yards away the water was lost in the dense steaming miasma that hemmed them in on all sides. With glad expressions on their faces, the party ran down to the edge of the water and gathered up great masses of clams and crabs. At first they ate the food raw, tearing the flesh from the shells. Then they made what I understood was a fire, although the girl was able to visualize it only as a bright red spot that flickered. The scene faded, and there was only the slowly swirling mist that I understood indicated the passing of centuries. Then the scene cleared again. I saw that same shoreline, but the people had vanished. There was only the thick, steamy mist, the tropic jungle crowding down to the shore, and the waves rolling in monotonously from the waste of gray ocean beyond the curtain of fog. Suddenly, from out of the ocean, appeared a series of human heads, and then a band of men and women that waded ashore and seated themselves upon the beach, gazing restlessly out across the sea. This was not the same band I'd seen at first. They were a slimmer race, and whereas the first band had been exceedingly swarthy, these were very fair. Okay, does swarthy mean what I think it means? More importantly, is it like a... Yeah, just dark of skin. Dark-skinned. Yeah, it does mean what I think it means. Let's hope it's not like an offensive term now or something. They did not stay long on shore, for they were restless and ill at ease. It seemed to me that they came there only from force of habit, as though they obeyed some inner urge they didn't understand. In a few seconds they rose and ran into the water, plunged into it as though they had welcomed its embrace, and disappeared. Then again the vision was swallowed up by the swirling mists of time. When the scene cleared again, it showed the bottom of the sea. A group of perhaps 100 pale creatures moved along the dim floor of the ocean, and ahead I could see the dim outlines of one of their strange cities. The band approached, seemed to talk with those there, and moved on. I saw them capture and kill fish for food, saw them carve the thick, spongy hearts from certain giant growths, and eat them. I saw a pair of killer sharks swoop down on the band, and the quick, deadly accuracy with which both men and women met the attack. One man, older than the rest, was injured before the sharks were vanquished, and when their efforts to staunch his wounds proved unavailing, they left him there and moved on. As they left, I saw a dim, crawling shape move closer, throw out a long, whip-like tentacle, and wrap the body in a hungry embrace. They came to and passed other communities of beings like themselves, and a city of their own, in much the way that Mercer had visualized it. Fading, the scene changed to the interior of the coral house again. The old man had finished his story, and moved off into a cubicle in the rear of the place. Dimly I could see there a low couch, piled high with soft marine growths. And then the scene shifted once more. A man and a woman hurried up and down the narrow streets of the strange city the girl had pictured when she showed us how she'd met with the shark, and struck her head so that for a long period she lost consciousness and was washed ashore. Others, after a time, joined them in their search, which spread out to the floor of the ocean, away from the dwellings. One party came to the gaunt skeleton of the ancient wreck, and found the scattered, fresh-picked bones of the shark the girl had killed. The man and the woman came up, and I looked closely into their faces. The woman's features were torn with grief, and the man's lips were set tight with suffering. Here it was easy to guess, were the mother and father of the girl. A milling mass of white forms shot through the water in every direction, searching.
It seemed that they were about to give up the search when suddenly, from out of the watery gloom, there shot a slim white figure. A girl. Straight to the mother and the father she came, gripping the shoulder of each with frantic joy. They returned the caress as the crowd gathered around them, listening to her story as they moved slowly, happily, towards the distant city. Instead of a picture, I was conscious then of a sound like a single pleading word repeated softly, as though someone said, "Please, please, please," over and over again. The sound was not at all like the English word. It was a soft, musical beat, like the distant stroke of a mellow gong, but it had all the pleading quality of the word it seemed to bring to mind. I looked down into the pool, and the girl had mounted the ladder until her face was just below the surface of the water. Her eyes met mine, and I knew that I had not misunderstood. I threw off the instrument on my head and dropped down beside her. With both hands I grasped her shoulders, and smiling, I nodded my head vigorously. She understood. I knew she did. I read it in her face. When I climbed the ladder again, she looked after me, smiling confidently. Although I hadn't spoken to her, she had read and accepted the promise. Mercer stared at me silently, grimly, as I told him what I wished. Whatever eloquence I may have, I used on him, and I saw his cold, scientific mind waver before the warmth of my appeal. "We have no right to keep her from her people. You saw her mother and father. You saw their suffering and the joy her return would bring. Mercer, we have to return her to the sea." For a long time Mercer didn't reply, and then he lifted his dark eyes to mine and smiled rather wearily. "It is the only thing we can do, Taylor. She's not a scientific specimen. She is, in her way, human as you or I. She'd probably die away from her own kind, living under such foreign conditions. And you promised her, Taylor, whether you spoke or promised or not. We cannot let her receive too bad of an opinion of her cousins who live above the surface of the sea, after all." And so, just as the dawn was breaking, we took her to the shore. I carried her, unresisting, trustful, in my arms, while Mercer bore a huge basin of water in which her head was submerged, so that she might not suffer. Still in our bathing suits, we waded out into the ocean until the waves splashed against our faces, and I lowered her into the sea. Crouching there so that the water was just above the tawny glory of her hair, she gazed up at us. Two slim white hands reached towards us, and with one accord, Mercer and I bent towards her. She gripped both our shoulders with a gentle pressure and smiled at us. And then she did a strange thing. She pointed under the water, out towards the depths with a broad, sweeping motion of her arm, and she indicated the shore, as though to say she intended to return. With a last swift, smiling glance up into my face, she turned. There was a flash of white through the water, and she was gone. Silently, through the silence and the beauty of the dawn, we made our way back to the house. As we passed through the laboratory, Mercer glanced out at the empty pool. "Men came up from the sea, and some went up back to it. They were forced back to the teeming source from whence they came for lack of food. You saw that, Taylor. Saw our forebears become amphibians like the now extinct Dipneusta and Genodiae, or the still existing Neroceratodus, Polypterus, and Amia. Then their lungs became, in effect, gills, and they lost their power of breathing atmospheric air, and could only use air dissolved in water. A whole people there, beneath the waves that landman never dreamed of, except perhaps the sailors of olden days with their tales of mermaids, which we are accustomed to laugh at in our wisdom. But why were no bodies washed ashore? I would think you saw why. The ocean teems with hungry life. Death is a signal for the feast. It was little more than a miracle that our body came ashore, a miracle due perhaps to the storm which sent the hungry monsters to greater depths. And even had a body come ashore, it would have been buried as that of some unknown unfortunate human. These differences between the people and ourselves would not be noticeable to a casual observer. No, Taylor, we've been party to what was close to a miracle, and we are the only witnesses to it, you and Carson and myself. And it's over." I didn't reply. I was thinking of the girl's odd gesture at parting, and I wondered if it were indeed a finished chapter. And so the strange tale of the girl brought up from the water draws to a close. And now we have our, as far as I'm aware, final tale. Yep. It's called Vandals of the Stars. And it's by, just a moment here, Vandals of the Stars by A.T. Locke. If you'll allow me a moment, I need to just drink some water real quick, and then we can get into this story. Nothing like some good water to, get your throat in a good zone. I'm just going to finish this water. There's hardly any left. I really don't enjoy drinking on camera just because I know I drink very loudly. And I know people are not a fan of that sound. So let's begin on our final tale here. We'll see how long it's going to take me. If we don't finish it, we can always finish it next week. I would really very much enjoy to finish it this week, though. And I should mention, after the stream, I'm going to go ahead and host Awesome Games Done Quick. They're essentially a charity telethon done through the internet where they speedrun games, and they've been doing it all week. And they're coming up on the finale here in a couple days. It's a great time, and it's a great cause, and I really want to host it so that I can send all you lovely folks over that way. If you're not one to do speedruns, at least just hang out for a little bit, because it's not a traditional speedrun where it's just someone very focused on a game. There's actually, commentary, so you can tell what's going on. It's a good time, I promise. Anyway, I digress a great deal. Here's the last story in we're on the March issue, right? Yep. Here's the last story in the March 1930 issue, Vandals of the Stars by A.T. Locke. It came suddenly, without warning, and it brought consternation to the people of the world. A filament of flame darted down the dark skies one moonless night, and those who saw it believed at first that it was a meteor. Instead of streaking away into oblivion, however, it became larger and larger, until it seemed as though some vagrant, blazing star was about to plunge into the earth and annihilate the planet and every vestige of life upon it. But then it drew slowly to a stop high up in the atmosphere, where it remained motionless, glowing white and incandescent against the Stygian background of the overcast skies. In shape it resembled a zeppelin, but its dimensions very apparently exceeded by far any of those of any flying craft that had ever been fabricated by the hand of man. As it hung posed high up in the air, it gradually lost its dazzling glow and became scarlet instead of white. And then as it continued to cool, color swiftly drained from it, and in a few minutes it shone only with a dull and ugly crimson of an expiring ember. In a half hour after it had first appeared, its effulgence had vanished completely, and it was barely visible to the millions who were staring up toward it from the earth. It seemed to be suspended directly above Manhattan, and the inhabitants of New York were thrown into a feverish excitement by the strange and unprecedented phenomenon. For it had scarcely come to a stop, and certainly it had not been poised aloft for more than a few minutes, when most of those who had not actually witnessed its sensational appearance were apprised of the inexplicable occurrence by the radio vision, which were scattered throughout the vast metropolis. In theaters and restaurants and other gathering places, as well in millions of homes, a voice from the worldwide broadcasting tower announced the weird visitant, and its image as it glowed in the night was everywhere transmitted to the public. Only a short time after it had first been observed, people were thronging rooftops, terraces, and streets, and gazing with awe and wonder at the great luminous object that was floating high above them. There were those who thought that the world was coming to an end, and they were either dumb with fright or strident with hysteria. People with more judgment and a smattering of scientific knowledge dismissed the thing as some harmless meteorological manifestation that, while interesting, was not necessarily dangerous. And there were many, inclined to incredulity and skepticism, who believed that they were witnessing a hoax or an advertising scheme of some new sort. But as the moments went by, the world commenced to become stirred and alarmed by the reports, which came over the radio visors. For powerful planes and metal-shelled zeppelins had climbed swiftly aloft to investigate the incomprehensible thing that was poised high above Manhattan, and almost unbelievable reports were being sent earthward. Dirk Vanderpool had been sitting alone on the broad terrace of his apartment that occupied the upper stories of the great Gotham Gardens building when he saw that streak of fire slip down against the darkness of the night. For a moment he too had believed that he was watching a meteor, but when he saw it come to a slow stop and hang stationary in the heavens, he rose to his feet with an exclamation of surprise. For a while he gazed upward with an expression of astonishment on his face, and then turned as he heard someone walking softly in his direction. It was Barstow, his valet, and the eyes of the man were alive with fear.
"What is that thing, Mr. Vanderpool?"
he asked in a voice that trembled with alarm. Barstow was a man of middle age, diminutive in size, and he had the appearance of nearly being petrified with terror.
"They're saying over the televisor that
What are they saying about it?
no one can explain what it is. It must be something, It's something terrible, Mr. Vanderpool."
We'll have the lucoscope. Alright, is lucoscope a word, or is it... Nope, no definition found. It's a lore word. We're going to find out what the heck the lucoscope is. It's, judging by the Lucy as in lucidity, it's probably make clear. It's probably like a fancy version of a telescope. Anyway, Barstow disappeared into the apartment and returned with a cabinet that was mounted on a small, rubber-tired wheels. The top of it was formed of a metallic frame in which a heavy, circular concave glass was fitted. The frame was hinged in front so that it could be raised from the rear and adjusted to any angle necessary to catch the light rays from any distant object. Within the cabinet, the rays passed through an electrical device that amplified them millions of times, thus giving a clear telescopic vision of the object on which the lucoscope was focused. This instrument, years before, had been supplanted entirely. This instrument years before had supplanted entirely the old-fashioned telescopes, which had not only been immense and unwieldy, but also had a very limited range of vision. Dirk adjusted the light converger so that it caught the rays that were being emanated by the weird and shimmering mass that was suspended almost directly over the lofty terrace on which he was standing. Then he switched on the current and glanced into the eyepiece of the apparatus. For several moments he remained silent, studying the image that was etched so vividly on the ground glass within the lucoscope.
"It's indeed a queer thing, there's no doubt about that,"
he confessed when he finally raised his head.
"It resembles a gigantic zeppelin in shape, but does not seem to have any undercarriage or, as far as I can see, any indication of propellers or portholes. I'd say, Barstow, that it might be a ship from some other planet, as if it... if it wouldn't be almost molten as it is now."
Dirk again looked into the lucoscope, and he made a few adjustments with the thumb screw that projected from the side of the apparatus.
"It's up about 40,000 feet, and it must be more than a half-mile in length. Probably it's a planetary fragment of odd composition that is less responsive to gravity than the materials with which we're familiar. You'll find, Barstow, that there's nothing about it that science will not be able to explain. That's all now."
Barstow walked over to the terrace and disappeared into the apartment. Dirk, left alone, wheeled the lucoscope over by the chair in which he'd been sitting, and near which a radio visor was standing. He switched on the latter and listened to the low hum that was He switched on the ladder and listened to the low but very distinct voice of the news dispatcher. "Planes and zeppelins now are starting up to investigate the strange phenomenon." Again, Dirk placed an eye to the lens of the lucoscope, and once more the thing leaped into his vision. The powerful machine brought it up so close to him that he could see the heat waves quiver up from it. The light that it radiated illuminated the night for thousands of feet, and Dirk could see, by means of that crimson glare, that many planes and zeppelins were circling around the mysterious visitant. None of them, however, approached the alien freak, the heat being apparently too intense to permit close inspection. Dirk himself was tempted to jump into a plane and go up and take a look at the fiery mass, but after a moment's consideration he decided that it would be far more interesting and comfortable to remain right where he was and listen to the reports which were being sent down from above.
Thus far, there seems to be no cause for alarm, and people are advised to remain calm. Careful observations of the luminous monster are being made, and further reports concerning it will be broadcast.
Dirk Vanderpool rose to his feet, walked to the coping of the terrace, and peered into the magnoscope that was set into the wall. He saw that the street far below him was jammed with struggling people, and the device through which he was looking brought their faces before him in strong relief. Dirk was deeply interested, and at the same time gravely concerned as he studied the upturned countenances in the mob. Fear, despair, reckless abandon, mirth, doubt, religious ecstasy, and all the other nuances and the gamut of human emotions and passions were reflected in those distorted visages which were gazing skyward. The silvery humming of a bell diverted English. The silvery humming of... I didn't even mess up a word there. I just stopped. Good job. 10 out of 10. The silvery humming of a bell diverted his attention from the scene of congestion below him, and turning away, he walked across the terrace and into the great living room of his luxurious abode. Stepping to the televisor, he turned a tiny switch, and the face of a girl appeared in the glass panel that was framed above the sound box. He smiled as he lifted the receiver and placed it to his ear.
"What's the matter, Inga? You look as if you were expecting, well, almost anything disastrous."
Oh, Dirk, what is that thing? I really am frightened.
He could see by the expression in her blue eyes that she too was becoming a victim of the hysteria that was taking possession of many people.
"I wouldn't be alarmed, Inga. I don't know what it is, and no one else seems to be able to explain it."
But it's frightful and uncanny, Dirk. I'm sure that something terrible is going to happen. I wish you would come over and stay with me for a little while. I'm all alone and...
All right. I'll be with you in a few minutes."
He hung up the receiver of the televisor and clicked off the switch. The image of the golden-haired girl to whom he had been speaking slowly faded from the glass. Attiring himself for a short 60-mile hop down Long Island, Dirk passed out to the landing stage and, stepping into the cabin of his plane, he threw in the helicopter lever. The machine rose straight into the air for a couple hundred feet, and then Dirk headed it westward to where the nearest ascension beam sent its red light towering toward the stars. It marked a vertical airlane that led upward to the horizontal lanes of flight. Northbound ships flew between 2,000 and 4,000 feet, southbound planes between 5,000 and 7,000. Those eastbound confined themselves to the level of 9,000 and 11,000 feet, while the westbound flyers monopolized the air between 12,000 and 14,000 feet. All planes flying parallel to the Earth were careful to avoid those red beacons which marked ascension routes, and the shafts of green light down which descending planes dropped to the Earth or into lower lanes of travel. When Dirk's altimeter indicated 7,500 feet, he turned the nose of his ship eastward and adjusted his rheostat until his motors, fed by wireless current, were revolving at top speed. The great canyons of Manhattan, linked by arches and highways which joined and passed through various levels of the stupendous structures of steelite and quartzite, passed swiftly beneath him, and after passing for a few minutes over the deserted surface of Long Island, he completed his 60-mile flight and brought his ship to rest on a landing stage that was far up on the side of a vast pile that rose up close to the shore of the Sound. As soon as he stepped from the door of the cabin, he was joined by a girl who apparently had been lingering there, awaiting his arrival. He's not dead. She was perhaps 20 years old, and she had the golden hair, the light complexion, and the blue eyes which were still characteristic of the women of Northern Europe. Hi there, dated attitudes, everybody's favorite. I mean, that's one way of describing it, but everybody, it's from the 30s. You gotta let it go, Anyway, I digress. The slender lines of her exquisite figure and the supple grace which she displayed when she moved toward Dirk were, oh, hi there, more. Oh boy, we're having ourselves a time. which she displayed when she moved toward Dirk, were evidence, however, of the Latin blood which was in her veins. Oh, stereotypes, everybody's favorite. For Inga Fragoni, the daughter and heiress of Orlando Fragoni, seemed to be a culmination of all the desirable qualities of the women of the South and those of the North. Hi. It's another Hello 1930s episode, everybody's favorite. The terrace on which Dirk had landed was illuminated by lights which simulated sunshine, and their soft, bright glow revealed the violet hue of her eyes and the shimmering gloss of her silken hair. She wore a sleeveless light blue tunic which was gathered around her waist with a bejeweled girdle. On her tiny feet she wore sandals, which were spun of webby filaments of gold and platinum. Dang, that's fancy.
Dirk, I'm so glad you're here. I felt so much alone when I called you up. Dad's locked in the observatory with Professor Noshbar and 3 or 4 other men and the servants, and well, they're all so terrified it just simply alarms me to have them around.
But that's Stanton's plane there, isn't it?
Asked Dirk, indicating a powerful-looking machine that stood on the terrace. Actually, I'm gonna just stick to a 2-hour stream, folks, because I wanna throw it over to AGDQ, because they're a great cause. The thing with AGDQ and SGDQ is they're run by the same company, Games Done Quick, and one's during the summer and one's now. And AGDQ is always Prevent Cancer Foundation. They donate all their money to Prevent Cancer Foundation, and SGDQ is Doctors Without Borders, I think. And they're just really good causes, and you guys should go head over there. I'm going to host them right after the stream. We're going to go give them a one-person raid, even though it's sub-chat only, which I don't mind that. It's such a huge event, they're going to moderate a crazy chat anyway. Anyway, I digress. We'll finish up this story that we've just started. This mysterious alien, probably Zeppelin thing has dropped in, and we're in a futuristic world of flying. Like, airplanes are as common as airplanes are much more common. There's much more, the private airplane is very much a thing, and this girl, like, apparently they've progressed as a society so that such that they can have platinum and gold shoes. Anyway, I digress. It's very steampunk. It's very, very much exactly hitting the notes that you would expect a story like this to hit. Anyway, I digress a great deal. We will finish up our story of the Vandals of the Stars next week, folks. For now, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. This has been Paper Cuts, and hey, I hope it didn't sting.